So good evening, everyone. And for those of you I haven't met, I'm Gillian Siegel and the chair of the foundation. This evening, of course, we are gathered on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And on behalf of all of us, I would like to warmly acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land. And we are very privileged to be visiting our calling home, working or living on this land. And we also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands around the country where John Monash scholars live and work. As a national body, we obviously encompass scholars everywhere. And we acknowledge their continuing culture and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and celebrate those emerging, some of whom indeed are John Monash scholars. So what a pleasure it is to actually be gathered together in person this year, following 2 years of virtual events. So not only a warm welcome to all of you, but very, very sincere thanks to Commonwealth Bank for hosting us this evening, for continuing to host the oration for many years. I think it's 11 or so, but actually to come back together has been very special. And can I welcome not only the supporters of the foundation, but many Commonwealth Bank clients and representatives, and also representatives from Cricket Australia as an illustration of a connection that we share with our scholar speaking tonight, Ryan Carters. And can I also acknowledge this evening my fellow directors who are all with us. So they stand up so you all know who the directors of the foundation are. There we go. And can I also acknowledge and thank the CEO, Anne-Marie Rolls, and Chuan Tan, our finance director, who are with us this evening. And it's very special because you think that our directors come from all around the country and we managed to coordinate everyone's diaries to come to have a board meeting today and to come to this oration. So I think a recognition of how much importance we attribute to this particular event. We continue to be grateful, as I said a moment ago, for all the support that we receive from the Commonwealth Bank. A really forward-thinking corporate, like some others that support us, like BHP and Wesfarmers and Rio, and the governments of New South Wales, Victoria, and federally. But can I acknowledge that CBA was one of our founding supporters in 2004? And it's very special to have a corporate actually last the distance and stay with us as an organisation that has grown and developed and matured. And I think that shows a true and commendable commitment to leadership and the importance of it for a better Australian. And now we have 12 John Monash scholars who have been directly supported by CBA over the years, as well as the entire network of 248 scholars who have benefited from the areas of work research from those 12 scholars. So a very special thank you to Andrew Hinchliffe, who's here, who you're going to hear from next, who is our host tonight and who is Group Executive Institutional Banking and Markets. So can we have a hand for CBA and Andrew? I've got one more thing to say. I just want to thank a few other people because we have a number of representatives here of universities, and can I thank you for being with us and for being part of the Universities Consortium funding group, and many generous philanthropists who are with us, who make the scholarships that we award possible, either collectively through the Chairman's Circle or as perpetual scholar donors, or supporting our Leadership Academy. So thank you to each of you. I'm not going to name each of you, but know that we actually appreciate every single one of you. Now, apart from our other speaker tonight, Ryan Carters, who you'll hear from later, who serendipitously is the 2018 Roth Siegel Scholar. So he's been supported by a perpetual scholarship that my husband and I have donated to the foundation a number of years ago. We have a number of other John Monash scholars here. I'm not sure what the exact number is because a few of them have been unwell and coming, but perhaps a dozen. Sorry? Oh, put your hands up. Absolutely, good idea. Yeah, stand up. Stand up. There should be some returned and some still studying, etc. But I think they represent the 19 years that we've actually awarded scholarships. With Tom Hanna, a 2004 scholar, through to one of our newest ones, Hugo Rourke, who's the Commonwealth Bank scholar for this year. I know it's going to be messy, but we thought it would be good for the scholars to move table after main course. So they've organised where they're going, and that will allow everyone to chat to different scholars. And I don't know, Anne-Marie, I can't hear any music. Have they turned off the music?
It's turned off the speaking.
Okay, because there was some music playing earlier, and I don't know if any of you noticed it, but we are really infiltrating everyone's lives in many respects, because even the music tonight was a collection of compositions from the 2016 Zelman Cowen John Monash scholar, Michael Grebley, who I caught up with recently in New York, and who's flitting between Australia and New York with commissions. So we will have ideas and all sorts of things promulgated by John Monash scholars, but also music. We've had a very productive year despite the challenges, and new supporters, momentum through the Leadership Academy, and in your take-home bag, and please everyone take home your take-home bag. It's got a copy of our latest annual report that's just hot off the press, and one of those wonderful diary notation booklets that people love to use, that I hope you will use during this next year. And if you want to know more, become a supporter, please be in touch with me or Anne-Marie. So can I just thank again Andrew, and hand over to him to come and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. That is an excellent introduction, Gillian. Thank you very much. I think you took every data point that I had to mention, which is absolutely fine. I've still got one very important thing to do, which is to introduce our keynote. But on a serious note, firstly, welcome Andrew Hinchliffe, the Group Executive for the Institutional Banking and Markets business here at CBA, and welcome to the 11th General Sir John Monash Foundation Oration. We are extraordinarily proud to be associated with the foundation. We've had a long-standing partnership. We've been involved since 2004. And, I'll reiterate Gillian's comments that it is fantastic to see everybody in person again as well. I mean, it's a little bit of blur the last sort of 2 to 3 years, I have to say, but we've had a couple of Zoom episodes. We've maintained the momentum, but, it's good to have everybody here in person again. CBA funds annual 2-year scholarships. As Gillian mentioned, we've up to our 12th, which is fantastic. We're deeply passionate around the objectives of the scholarship, which is fostering and enabling critical talent in Australia to make a real difference for the country by studying overseas at leading tertiary institutions. And, as I've spoken to a couple of people around the room already tonight, this talent is exceptional. We're very lucky to have them, and we need to do everything we possibly can to foster them and allow them to deliver into the critical challenges that is facing the country going forward, of which they're extremely capable. I'd also like to acknowledge Hugo Rourke, this year's recipient of the CBA scholarship, to echo Gillian's comments. Hugo is going to study, I'm going to get this right, behavioural science, focused on how to deliver better health outcomes for Australia. You're going to focus to study at the University of Chicago, focused at the Harris School of Public Policy. So now on to my introduction to the keynote, and please forgive me, I'm going to read this bit out because it's impressive. This is Carol Schwartz. So Carol Schwartz is a dynamic business community leader with diverse career across property sector, arts, finance, investment, entrepreneurship, government and health. She's chaired and participated in numerous company and government boards and conducted significant inquiries on behalf of government. Her current board roles include the Reserve Bank of Australia, Trawala Group and chair of EQT Holdings Limited. Carol's a highly regarded commentator on gender equality and women's leadership. She is chair of the Trawala Foundation and the Women's Leadership Institute of Australia, and has helped launch Pathways to Politics program for women, the Panel Pledge, and the Women for Media database. She is founding chair of our community, a member of the Harvard Kennedy School Women's Leadership Board and the Global Institute of Women's Leadership Advisory Board, King's College. She was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2019, and that is the abridged version of her bio for what it's worth as well. So Carol's going to get up and deliver the keynote, then she's going to welcome Ryan Carter's the 2018 Roth Siegel, John Monash Harvard Scholar, who's going to provide the scholar response. Carol, welcome. We look forward to hearing everything you've got to say tonight, and I look forward to joining you and Ryan for Q&A after the speeches. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I did say to Andrew, I've been around a very long time now, so that's why the CV looks like it does. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much to Gillian Siegel as chair, and to all of the General Sir John Monash Foundation Board for having me here this evening. And thanks also to you, Andrew, for that very kind introduction, because it really is a very great honour for me to be here. I wanted to begin with an acknowledgement to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us tonight. Thank you to Andrew and all of the Commonwealth Bank team for hosting us. And I also wanted to congratulate the 2023 Commonwealth Bank John Monash Scholar Hugo Rourke, and acknowledge all the John Monash scholars in the room. You are our future. And a particular thank you to Ryan Carter's, the 2018 Roth Siegel John Monash Scholar, for agreeing to provide a response to my oration. Your work, Ryan, with Batting for Change, which alleviates poverty and gender discrimination, has been absolutely excellent. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your philanthropic insights shortly. Finally, I wanted to acknowledge the legacy of General Sir John Monash, an absolutely outstanding Australian who understood the value of investing in education and developing exceptional leaders to advance Australia as a nation. This continues today via the Foundation's excellent scholarship program, which, in reference to the topic for tonight's oration, is an apt example of private and corporate philanthropy contributing to a stronger civil society. Thanks to the Foundation for proposing this engaging and important topic. In preparing for tonight's oration, I have enjoyed reflecting on the power and relevance of philanthropy, and whether this can actually be amplified for a more robust civil society. I look forward to sharing my experiences and ideas with you. Now, while the way I approach giving may not suit everybody, I hope at the very least it sparks your thinking about ways we can all be bolder and more entrepreneurial in our own philanthropy. My perspective on giving, not surprisingly, has been deeply influenced by the environment I grew up in. My family's story is one centred in valuing family, community, business, and ultimately a strong and democratic society. My maternal grandparents arrived in Australia in the early 1920s, together with their siblings and parents. They were escaping the pogroms or attacks against Jewish families that had been terrorising Jewish communities in Russia for decades. They arrived in Australia with very little language, minimal education, and limited funds, a typical immigrant story of that time. Everyone worked extremely hard to support the family. It was my grandmother, the only girl in the family, who turned out to be the most commercial and successful. She saw an opportunity to open a store selling ladies' lingerie and sleepwear, and within a short period had 3 successful city locations, all based in Melbourne. In the meantime, the Second World War had broken out in Europe. My father was forced to escape the Nazi invasion together with his parents. They escaped by boat, briefly settled in Israel, and from there my father was granted a scholarship to come to Australia and study textile design. He arrived in Australia around the age of 23 with no money, no family, and no connections. Like many new immigrants, my father was motivated to work hard and establish a new life for himself. Being the entrepreneur that he is, he's about to turn 99, some things failed and others succeeded. One of his luckiest and most important breaks was meeting and falling in love with my mother, both in a personal and business sense. My grandmother saw an opportunity to pass on the day-to-day running of the stores to her new son-in-law, my father, who, in his true entrepreneurial style, grew the business into a national chain of over 500 stores and thousands of employees, with all the inevitable excitement, dramas, successes and challenges that entails. Family and community was at the heart of this business, and my parents always remained very actively involved in a range of community groups and organisations. They felt an extremely strong desire to redress disadvantage, a deep commitment to the Jewish community, and a belief in the role that arts and culture can play in connecting and inspiring communities. And so that was the family I grew up in, highly entrepreneurial, deeply valuing education, driven to contribute to the community, and ultimately to be part of shaping and strengthening Australia's future. And that is what I have taken forward in the work and philanthropy that I pursue. Alongside this foundational family experience, I have increasingly become involved with philanthropy at scale, whether that is bringing together coalitions of donors to support a particular organisation or cause through various corporate board roles and their community investments, or by chairing equity trustees, which distributed $92 million in grants in FY22 and has more than $2.4 billion in funds under management. On the one hand, I am greatly encouraged by the level of collective philanthropy and genuine engagement in peak bodies such as Philanthropy Australia, Australian Environmental Grantmakers Network, and Australians Investing in Women. There are many innovative and strategic ideas being pursued in partnership right now across Australia. On the other hand, I also think we need to be pragmatic about the power, financial and otherwise, of Australian philanthropic giving, especially in comparison to other revenue and giving streams. Now, there are a few different ways to cut giving data, but let me share a few statistics from the 2022 Philanthropy Australia Giving Trends Report. In comparison to our global peers, total giving as a percentage of GDP is 0.81%, which lags behind the UK at 0.96%, New Zealand at 1.84%, and the US at 2.1%. The Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission data shows Australian financial donations have actually increased from 10.5 billion in 2018 to 12.7 billion in 2020. However, these donations only equate to 7% of total charity revenue, with 50% of charity revenue coming from governments and 33% from goods and services, that is, commercial activities undertaken by the charities themselves. Of the $12.7 billion donated in 2020, Approximately 2.4 billion was what Philanthropy Australia calls structured giving. This is classified as relatively large scale and planned giving by corporates and entities such as charitable trusts and private ancillary funds. Now, Philanthropy Australia's current strategy is focused on doubling this structured giving to 5 billion by 2030. And PA hopes to leverage the intergenerational wealth transfer currently underway. Certainly a lot can be achieved with $2.4 billion of structured giving, yet it is also true that it pales in comparison when put alongside the heft of government funding. Federal spending to charities alone equates to over $90 billion annually. So you can see the reality is that philanthropic dollars in themselves are not that powerful. They remain a very small part of the funding puzzle in Australia. However, I would argue that philanthropic power exists when you are able to direct your giving for outsized impact. And this requires clarity on two things in particular: the way you give and the intent. Let's start with the way you give. To me, philanthropy is a way to invest in ideas and leaders, and most importantly, to act as risk capital. Philanthropic funding provides a unique opportunity to build and test new approaches for social change and to demonstrate what's possible for both the not-for-profit sector and for government. Here's how we describe our philanthropy at the Trawalla Foundation, our family foundation. We work with an entrepreneurial mindset. We aim to be bold, curious, and action-oriented, and are willing to take intelligent risks alongside our partners. We focus on catalysing and growing new initiatives, business models, and organisations. Often we will act as a convener, bringing together a range of individuals or organisations to collaborate and share their expertise, and to ensure diverse voices are around the table and part of decision making. We will also use our skills, networks, mentoring and advocacy to support the work. Now, and I absolutely want to acknowledge that I haven't gone on this philanthropic journey alone, and to thank my husband, Alan Schwartz, and our Trawalla Foundation board members, Dennis Moriarty from our community and Simon Jones, and my Chief of Staff and fabulous CEO of the Trawalla Foundation, Sarah Buckley. Our giving approach reflects our entrepreneurial nature and requires a certain openness, adaptability, and most of all, a willingness to fail. Now, this may not be for everybody, but hopefully it illuminates some of the more holistic ways to engage as a philanthropist, even with relatively small amounts of funding. So the way you give matters, but clearly intent is crucial too. And by this, I mean, what are you trying to achieve with your philanthropy? I believe the most impactful philanthropy happens when you are clear on what issues matter to you most. You have listened and learned from leaders in the field, both locally and globally, and then form a view on the role that you can best offer within the ecosystem. Certainly there are many complex and interconnected social environmental issues that warrant our attention and support. But I really love that the topic today is focused on creating robust solutions for civil society. For me, this goes directly to the heart of what really matters. You may be aware that the word philanthropy comes from the ancient Greek and means love of humanity. This seems especially appropriate right now as we are living in rather precarious and uncertain times. We are experiencing very real challenges to the fabric of society, whether that is divisive and fractured politics, shifts in geopolitical power, inflation and financial instabilities, or the rapidly accelerating realities of climate change. Keeping all of that in mind, I can't help but think that one of the strongest demonstrations of a love of humanity is a diverse, vibrant and engaged civil society. And I genuinely believe that philanthropy has an important and relevant role to play in fostering and sustaining this. Encouragingly, some of the most innovative Australian philanthropy is focused on this, giving a voice to diverse communities and the issues that matter, highlighting best practice policy, pushing for transparency and integrity, and ultimately strengthening our democracy. This work is often explicitly non-partisan, aims to engage via evidence-based discourse and to advocate to shift public opinion and government priorities. Here are just a few of the outstanding philanthropic examples we have become involved with, noting, of course, there are many other excellent leaders and organisations to support. For us, it has included catalysing bold research and advocacy with organisations such as Climate Works, the Human Rights Law Centre, the Centre for Public Integrity and the Grata Fund. Or supporting balanced and independent media, for example, joining other philanthropists to save the Australian Associated Press, or supporting the Guardian's civic journalism grants in areas such as climate change. It's about building social sector leadership, innovation and capacity through enterprises such as Our Community, Social Ventures Australia and the Environmental Grantmakers Network. And it's about unleashing the potential of individuals, such as the fabulous John Monash Scholars, or the incredible group of Women's Leadership Institute Fellows that we support, who focus on issues around gender equity. It is likely no surprise to you that much of the Trawalla Foundation's work in this space takes a gender lens. It is something I have been passionately and loudly focused on for many years. Underpinning this is a fundamental belief in more women leaders. This is about optimising outcomes for our country by ensuring that men and women together share power, leadership and decision-making. We must grow the critical mass of diverse female leaders in politics, business and the media to truly disrupt the way decision-making is done. Equal representation will shape culture, decision-making, collaboration and ultimately reflect community issues in a much more fulsome way. Now, while these may sound like lofty and aspirational statements, I'm actually all about action and demonstrating what's possible in a myriad of ways. So I focus on this as a role model through my own board and other leadership roles, by mentoring and supporting other women, by directly investing in female founder-led businesses and female fund managers, and supporting the work of state and federal governments to strengthen women's economic equity. It is also the intent that drives much of my philanthropy, including catalysing new organisations such as the not-for-profit Women's Leadership Institute Australia and offering practical solutions for change, such as the WLIA Fellows that I mentioned earlier. But I do want to take you through one of our flagship initiatives that Andrew mentioned that I am especially proud of, and which gets to the heart of the role philanthropy can play to create a strong and engaged civil society and to change the status quo. It is the establishment of the Pathways to Politics program for women, which is literally changing the face of Australian politics. It is the first Australian non-partisan initiative aimed at political gender parity and is increasing female participation, by equipping diverse women to succeed in running for elected office and to thrive as political leaders. The program is innovative in design, mixing training on topics such as campaigning, ethics, media and party machines with insightful Q&A sessions and networking with experts and politicians across the political spectrum. We are totally politically agnostic. Pathways is a network of independent state programs based at leading Australian universities, as I found that partnering with universities was actually the most effective way of leveraging the program. And it's modelled on the highly successful Harvard program called From Harvard Square to the Oval Office. Now, I initiated it in 2016 with the University of Melbourne and the Women's Leadership Institute Australia. Together, we successfully piloted the program, and we are now in our 7th year. QUT, UNSW, Charles Darwin University also run programs in their respective states, and next year it will also be offered in the ACT and South Australia. By 2024, it will become available to women right across Australia. The program has achieved remarkable success. We now have over 300 alum, and more than 70 women have run for pre-selection or office. Even Harvard is jealous of those stats. We currently have 21 electoral successes across the political spectrum at the federal, state and local levels. And 19 women ran in the recent Victorian state election that was held last weekend, and we had a success rate close to 30%. Not bad, huh? I am passionate about how we support the Pathways alum over the next 10 to 20 years, both in continuing their political journeys and in improving our parliaments so that they feel safe and thrive. Alongside our philanthropic support for women in political leadership, we are also focused on accelerating gender balance in the media. Last year, we launched a significant report called Take the Next Steps, which is the 5th and most comprehensive report in our Women for Media series. Led by journalist and academic Dr. Jenna Price, the report explored the role of female voices in Australian news, those quoted in news stories and those who wrote the stories. I am absolutely convinced that female media representations matter for strengthening gender equality. We have to shift the norm in terms of what a leader or expert looks like and sounds like. And an important way to address this is rebalancing the voices that are heard in the mainstream media. The 2021 report combined quantitative and qualitative analysis of more than 60,000 articles across the month of May 2021, plus in-depth interviews with leading figures in the media landscape. Not surprisingly, men's voices continue to dominate the space in news stories. Over 2/3 of quotes are spoken by men, while women provide only 31%. Men's voices are overrepresented in all categories. The extent of their overrepresentation varies from 54% of quotes in arts and entertainment to 70% in politics, 76% in business, and 84% in sport. While the findings of this report demonstrate that we still have quite a way to go, I'm actually really buoyed by a shift in attitude and commitment from Australian media management in comparison to our prior reports. Almost everyone interviewed agreed that diversity and gender equality in our news coverage is really important to address, especially when considering the purpose of our media and the role it has in fairly representing and supporting Australian people now and into the future. Many are trialling ways to tackle this and learning from positive progress elsewhere. and I will keep shining a light on this issue and directly pushing media organisations for the change required. So, in closing, I hope that I have provided you with tangible examples of the opportunities philanthropy presents to genuinely contribute to civil society. We often think people need a huge foundation or have to be Melinda Gates to do powerful philanthropy. But actually, it's far more about a statement made by General Sir John Monash when he wisely said over 100 years ago, "Equip yourself for life, not solely for our own benefit, but for the benefit of the whole community." I urge you to consider your own personal or corporate philanthropy and to think about how you could be bolder in the way you give and your intent so that you can contribute to changing Australian society for the better. Thank you for listening to my reflections, and I now greatly look forward to hearing Ryan Carter's response.
Carol, that was wonderful. Okay. Oh, the mic's on. Good evening, everyone. I first want to echo Gillian and Andrew's points. It's so nice to be in person, and it's really wonderful to see so many familiar faces, as well as meet plenty of new people tonight. To Andrew and CBA, thank you so much for hosting this event and also for your ongoing support of the Monash Foundation. It really means a lot. And Carol, wow, that was awesome. So nice to hear about your personal story, your philosophy of giving, and also some really practical examples of the impact that your money is having. So thank you so much for sharing, and I hope I can echo a few of those themes in my response. And as I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. A few months ago, an invitation arrived in my inbox. Would you consider speaking at the upcoming Monash Oration? The topic, how do we best elevate the role of philanthropy to create robust solutions in civil society? Now, I've got to admit, I didn't feel like I was the person best placed to answer it. For one thing, I don't normally think of myself as a philanthropist. The word itself can feel a bit exclusive. It makes me think of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, billionaires who had fortunes larger than the GDP of most countries, and then chose to give away a large amount of that money to charity. So where do all the rest of us fit in? But let's imagine for a moment that we can forget everything we know about philanthropy. There is no list of tax-deductible charity organisations. There is no corporate giving program. There is no funding strategy and no theory of change. When you strip all that away, what's left? It all comes down to giving, right? Well, actually, every act of philanthropy is about giving and receiving. And those two things I think we can all relate to. So take a moment and I invite you to consider, what have you received in your life through the generosity of others with no expectation of having to pay it back? And when have you given in your life in order to help others with no expectation of personal reward? Maybe you're remembering volunteering at a local community or sporting event, or caring for an elderly relative. Or perhaps you're remembering a time when a teacher or a stranger gave you an act of kindness just when you needed it the most. And while you reflect on your own stories of receiving and giving, I'd like to briefly share mine and then share those of some of the organisations and people who most inspire me and I've been lucky to be involved with. This is a photo of me on my 3rd birthday. My personality was already emerging. First thing to notice, sandals and socks, clashing stripes, and Harry high pants. My parents are here tonight, so if you catch up with them later, you ask what they were thinking with this outfit. But safe to say my fashion sense got off to a slow start, and some would say never really caught up. Second thing to notice is my brand new yellow cricket bat. I got it for my birthday that morning, and I was already obsessed. It was always my dream to play cricket for Australia. When I was young, my gran would take me to the local park, where she'd impersonate Glenn McGrath. Fortunately, Gran's bowling was rather gentler than Glenn's, so occasionally I got to feel like I actually was Ricky Ponting and not just a 5-year-old being outplayed by his gran. From my late teens and early 20s, I was fortunate enough to live my dream of being a professional cricket player. And I travelled around the country and around the world, representing Victoria, New South Wales, the Sydney Sixers, and the Cricket Australia 11. I loved my time playing professional cricket, playing with and against my childhood heroes, challenging myself to be at my best. And yet, I also saw that my childhood heroes, now my teammates and opponents, were often part of a largely unheroic male culture, where bigotry and misogyny were accepted, and there were more philanderers than philanthropists. Travelling through cricket-playing nations such as India, South Africa, and Nepal, I met people struggling to overcome hunger and poverty in a vastly unequal world. Meanwhile, I was a walking billboard for KFC. At times, despite the all-consuming effort that was required to compete at an elite level, sport felt unimportant compared to bigger challenges facing our society. And yet, I also began to see that sport has an outsized role in our society, and it gives a tremendous platform for messages that shape our national conversation, whether for good or for bad. I wasn't a big star like Glenn McGrath or Ricky Ponting, but I decided to do what I could to use sport as a force for good and for giving. I founded Batting for Change, a charity initiative in partnership with the LBW Trust that supports education for disadvantaged young people in developing cricket-playing nations. In its first 5 years, Batting for Change raised over $1 million from everyday Australians and corporate partners, and supported the education of over 1,500 disadvantaged young people, predominantly women, in India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Kenya. During the off-season, I would visit the communities we supported and was always so inspired by the students that I met. I remember meeting Mav on my visit to Mumbai. After her father died, Mav was unable to continue her education as the family had run out of money. But thanks to Batting for Change funding, Mav was able to restart and continue her Bachelor of Commerce at the SPN Doshi Women's College. When I spoke to her, she said her dream was to become a professor of economics and give back to the next generation of women through teaching. Two years after that visit, I decided to end my sporting career early to pursue a career that might contribute to social change. The following year, I was incredibly fortunate that the John Monash Foundation decided to back that pursuit, and I received a scholarship to complete my Master's in Public Policy at Harvard University. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. It greatly expanded my horizons, and it equipped me with the skills and confidence to contribute in new fields upon returning home, such as contributing to Australia's COVID response, helping businesses and governments to reduce carbon emissions, and improving healthcare and social services for vulnerable Australians. So reflecting on my journey, I see a pattern of receiving and giving. As a young child, I received oodles of stripy, high-waisted love and support for my dreams. As an athlete, I tried to use the platform of sport to create opportunities for others. And in turn, I received an incredible opportunity for my own education from the Monash Foundation, which I hope to pay forward, like so many of the inspiring Monash scholars I look up to, including some of those in the room, and more broadly, so many people in this room who are working to address some of Australia's biggest challenges. And this brings me back to the question, what is the role of philanthropy in addressing our biggest challenges? Like John Monash himself, although with far less gravitas and an inferior moustache, I believe in the awesome potential of Australia. There are so many incredible things about our country, and I'll touch on some of these shortly. And yet, also like John Monash, I believe that we can be better together. For all the talk of our rapidly changing world, many of the most important things are not changing nearly fast enough. Australian women continue to receive 15% less pay for the same work, and they retire with just over half the superannuation wealth of men. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's life expectancy is 8 years shorter than other non-Indigenous Australians. Income and wealth inequality have dramatically increased in our country since the 1980s. And despite recent improvement, Australia's climate change commitments are still insufficient to keep the world on a 1.5-degree trajectory. It can feel like these wicked, multidimensional problems are intractable, gridlocked, with no clear catalyst for change. Business is an engine of growth in our society and can achieve an immense amount of good when directed at the right problems, though the direction of that growth is of course constrained by market forces, and that doesn't always align with our most urgent social challenges. Government policy and spending is also immensely important. The pillars of our modern welfare state, like universal education, the age pension, Medicare and the NDIS, underpin our collective quality of life and reflect our values. Each of these achievements were hard fought and, historically speaking, fairly recent. To me, this shows that change is possible, but, and this is an important but, just as business is constrained by market forces, government is constrained by political realities. Sensible policy ideas are often overshadowed by short-term political considerations. So let's face it, real change does not come easily. In fact, it's bloody hard. And to me, this is precisely why philanthropy is so important. As Carol said, it comprises less than 1% of GDP. So philanthropy will never be the biggest dog in the fight. And yet, at its best, philanthropy can provoke, it can inspire, it can serve those who are underserved, and in doing so, it can blaze a trail that investors, businesses, government, and the broader community can and do follow. Because philanthropy is powered by giving freely, it has the freedom to be bold. It can stand up for the future people want to create, even when those ideas may be seen as too risky, progressive, or unfeasible for mainstream adoption. This role of philanthropy as a vanguard that leads the way and inspires others can be difficult to see if we focus only on 1 year, or even if we look at several years. But it becomes clear when we zoom out and take the long view. So let's take a moment to go back to 1953. It's not that long ago, really. Many of you were born around this time, just like many of my older friends, mentors, colleagues, and family. In 1953, there was no Medicare and there was no NDIS. People in underserved communities like Brisbane's southern suburbs would struggle to access care if they were unwell, disabled, or were unable to leave their homes. Sister Olive Crombie, the first blue nurse, began travelling by tram to tend to patients in their homes, providing care for free for those who could not afford to pay. The service grew quickly, supported by basic community fundraising such as door knock appeals. And by 1972, Blue Care had been operating for 2 decades and was providing 1 million visits per year to people in need. This is the same year that Gough Whitlam's government was elected, that would go on to introduce Australia's first universal healthcare program, Medibank. Today, Blue Care is a Queensland icon, delivering over 3 million visits per year to people in need, and is funded by government programs such as Commonwealth home care packages and the NDIS. The public and private sectors eventually stepped up to provide care for those in need, but only after dozens of philanthropic organisations like Blue Care led the way, acting as a moral compass for our country. I count myself lucky to have been involved with Blue Care, and also with another female-led vanguard of social change in Australia, Climate Works. Let's go back in time again, this time to 2009. Less than 15 years ago, there was no Paris Agreement to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees through progressive emissions reduction pledges. Australia had a government that favoured reducing emissions, but our national politics was about to suffer a decade of heartbreaking inaction on climate change. Business leaders and investors were frustrated by the lack of certainty, and many were unprepared to come forward with ambitious climate commitments. Led by CEO Anna Skarbek, who you can see on the screen, Climate Works was founded by Monash University and the Maya Foundation to drive progress on decarbonisation in Australia and our region. Before it was mainstream in this country, Climate Works was mapping ambitious, practical pathways to net zero across key sectors of our economy and working behind the scenes with government and business leaders to lay the groundwork for change. In the last few years, we've seen a flurry of much needed progress on climate change policy in Australia, including the national government's commitment to net zero by 2050, accelerated emissions reductions by 2030, and many of Australia's leading businesses, including the Commonwealth Bank, that have committed to net zero. The hard work of Climate Works Australia, which would not have been possible without bold philanthropy, contributed to the intellectual groundwork for this big step up in Australia's climate ambitions. Though of course we have a long way to go, and organisations like Climate Works will continue to play a role alongside government, business and community. Last year, I came across a book that asked a piercing question: what kind of ancestor do you want to be? It was a great question, just asked at the wrong time. My family was in the middle of Victoria's 92nd COVID lockdown, with a new baby, 2 exhausted parents, 2 lonely kids trapped at home, alongside long work hours. I was struggling to work out how to keep our heads above the water and how to stop the kids from throwing their porridge on the floor each morning, let alone ponder what sort of ancestor I wanted to be. And yet I thought of that book again as I wrote this speech. Nurse Olive Crombie of the West End Methodist Church, there was a good ancestor. Anna Skarbek, leader of Climate Works, that is the work of a good ancestor. And yet, none of their work would have been possible without the generous support of so many others who gave their energy, time, and resources. And each of these were being good ancestors. For most of our lives, we're working really hard just to meet the demands the world places upon us. It's rare that we get to stop and ask, what kind of world do we want to create 20 years from now? And what can we give to contribute to steering the world in that direction? For me, tonight is one of those rare moments. I look around this room and it's full of immensely skilled, hardworking and well-connected people. Imagine if we put our heads together and we put our hearts together and we each asked, what is one thing we could do or that we could do better in that precious fraction of our lives that is defined by giving, in the hope of creating a better world for our porridge-throwing children? Whether it be a young nurse delivering care to patients on the tram, a corporate foundation granting money to a climate change organisation, or an elderly woman coming into bowl dressed as Glenn McGrath, giving from the heart can have ripple effects for decades to come. Thank you.
I think what we'll do is we'll eat mains now, and then we'll get Carol and Ryan back up, and we'll do some questions, and then we'll have dessert. Well done. It was excellent. Come and have some food, and then we'll be back up shortly for questions. Mike, can everybody hear me? Excellent, excellent. All right. This is one of the better parts of my job. I get to meet and interview exceptional people, of which I'm sure you all agree, both Carol and Ryan were exceptional. We're very lucky to have them here with us tonight. So get your questions ready. There are some roving mics through the room. We've got 10 to 15 minutes before dessert comes. I might kick off. And one of the things I observed through both of your conversations, philanthropy, I learned a lot about it through your speeches. It's a lot more than money. It's about passion, energy, and the ability to drive change. And I love, by the way, that term, disrupt the decision-making process, which I think we can all sort of benefit from. So the question is, you're looking to give something away that somebody in theory should be very happy to accept. It's your passion and energy and desire to make the community a better place. Yet I'd imagine your desire to make everything a better place and give something away wasn't always well received and wasn't always as easy to get things done, whether it be the pathway to politics or batting for change. What were some of the obstacles that were in your way, in theory, to giving something away?
That's such an interesting question.
Thank you.
Well, I guess, when I started thinking about pathways to politics, and I will share with this group why I did think about pathways to politics, and that was because not so long ago, we had a Prime Minister who had only one woman around a cabinet table. The cabinet table had 23 ministers around it. We had one woman. And we were being told that it was not the time for women to take on those roles. That infuriated me. I was outraged every single day when I thought about that. And I was surprised that other people weren't outraged and that we weren't doing anything about it. So I spoke to a colleague of mine who is the Dean of the Women in Public Policy program at Harvard University, a fabulous woman called Iris Bonet, and I said to her, I know you have a program called From Harvard Square to the Oval Office. Could we adapt that for Australia? And she said, absolutely, and we will help as much as we possibly can. I then rang the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, probably a lot of you know him, Glyn Davis, who was absolutely fantastic. We are so lucky as a country because he's now our head of Prime Minister and Cabinet and will do a great job in that role. And I said, would you be interested in partnering with me on putting together a pilot program? Well, let's see how it goes. And he said, sounds fantastic. I'll put you in touch with the people in the university who should meet. Anyway, I was told that it would take 2 years to get a pilot up by some people. And then I sort of manoeuvred my way through to the right people. And I said, this has to be up in 6 months. It's got to be up and running in 6 months. So I guess it's one thing to think about potential bureaucratic processes. And I guess, Ryan, in the sort of work that you've done, it's also, working through governments and making sure that you can get programs done. That can very often be time consuming and frustrating, and you feel that you're banging your head against a brick wall. But my advice would be just to battle axe your way through it and remove all the roadblocks as much as you possibly can. And don't take no for an answer.
Very good. And Ryan?
Yeah, I think I was in a bit of a different position to Carol. When I started batting for change, I was 22, and certainly lacked your experience, Carol, and probably your phone book as well. But I definitely
I had a phone book.
I definitely knew a lot of cricketers. That was one thing. No, I had this idea that it would be amazing if we used the Big Bash, which many of you may know, the Australia's T20 cricket competition, as a platform to invite people following along at home to pledge to donate money for every 6 that their team hit in the competition for the summer. But that was just an idea. I had no idea how to start a charity, so I had to quickly learn, how do you get a website and how do you get legal status? And everyone donates, but you have to also issue them with the receipts for their donations at the end of the season. And that was incredibly time consuming the first 1 or 2 years because we didn't have any of these things kind of automated. But I was lucky on 2 counts. One was that all of the, like so many people, once I sort of put myself out there with this idea, were willing to support, including other cricketers who put their names to the idea, and also other people in my network. And secondly, the LBW Trust, the charity that we partnered with, were like just a wonderful partner, and really serendipitous that I met them at the start of that journey. And that meant that when it came to the overseas projects that we supported, the role of Batting for Change wasn't the full. It would have been a huge amount of work to establish those NGO partnerships, do all the right due diligence and governance. We were able to essentially make the most of the LBW Trust's existing relationships and focus on helping them to build them and expand them with extra funding. But yeah, on the overseas side, there are always a few things that you wrestle with. One was having to choose between projects was hard. There'd be like an amazing charities helping to develop slums in Delhi versus a women's college in Mumbai. You're having to kind of look at what each of them are offering and decide where we're going to contribute our funds this year. And then annoying things get in the way, like that college in Mumbai at some stage lost its government-approved charity status for what we could tell seemed to be purely political reasons, and they got it back a year or 2 later. But that meant we could no longer support that program for that period, and we felt bad for the students.
Well, I think Ryan brings up an interesting point, which is also something that I look to do all the time, and that is leverage relationships and organisations. I think it's really important to do that. What you don't want to do is duplicate. What you want to do is leverage. So for me, with Pathways to Politics, partnering and collaborating with a university was for me a no-brainer, because universities are a place, they know their communities really, really well. And also they're excited to have those sorts of outreach programs. And I think, leveraging organisations, not-for-profits, people that you have access to is really, really important when you want to get something done, because it creates a multiplier effect for your objectives.
Yeah, and that was one of the more powerful things I took from your speech. Is it's quite often, I think, as you said, it's how you give and where you give, and it's the leverage impact that you can make. And quite often that comes from your idea generation and your community of stakeholders around you as well. So I might just see if there's any questions around the room. Just Gillian.
I wonder if I could ask Carol and then ask Ryan to comment on it. Carol, you mentioned the statistics that in terms of the charitable sector, 50% of it's funded by government, and 33% by corporates, and only 7%.
No, not 33% by corporates. It's 33% by the goods and services that are actually.
Sorry, by the goods, commercial.
But the not-for-profits actually perform themselves.
So their behaviours.
Yeah, it's like merchandise and stuff like that.
And only 7% by philanthropy. And so my question is really, is that a good statistic? Do you think that government should be funding 50%, or should, because government might be there, might not be there, etc. Should philanthropy grow in this country to represent a higher percentage of the funding, or do you think it is fine?
Yeah, well, I would say most definitely. I mean, when you look at the, when you have a look at the percentages in other countries, I mean, a small country like New Zealand, which is really interesting, because, I mean, you imagine why the US has a greater philanthropic contribution, because they don't have the same social welfare safety nets that we have. But New Zealand is a country that has very good social welfare safety nets. What makes New Zealand, I think it's 3 times the amount that we give. I mean, it's really interesting. But
so
I think...
How would you change that? I mean, how's the dial going to change?
Well, ask Philanthropy Australia. They're better at that stuff. Over to you, Ryan.
I think we should be up above 1%, Gillian. I think the US at around close to 2%, New Zealand over 2% should be a great benchmark for us to aspire to. I think as the point Carol made in her speech, and I probably echoed, is that it's never going to be as big as government funding for the non-profit sector. And I think a lot of that, to put that in context, a lot of that government funding for the non-profit sector, I imagine is large government programs like the NDIS and sort of support for aged care and things, because a lot of Australia's non-profits are really service delivery organisations. So that relatively small slice that is in fact philanthropy, yeah, would love to see that double, and I think then the impact of that could be enormous on the sector.
So, what was the reason for New Zealand being so high? Because
I don't know.
Because I would have thought
They're really good people.
they're nice people. They are. That's right. That they are.
They are very creative and innovative
I
too.
like the New Zealanders.
It's obviously a culture, you know, and maybe we just don't have that same sort of culture. And that's what we need to be focusing on. How do we create a culture, more of a culture of giving? Although I have heard statistics around Australians are incredibly generous, like when there's an emergency, you know, when there's an emergency situation, Australians are incredibly generous. But I guess also, I mean, Ryan is absolutely right. A lot of the not-for-profit services that government funds are things like aged care, childcare. These are things that, you know, also probably we as Australians believe government should be funding. And that, you know, for our philanthropy, we need to be more creative in filling the gaps rather than doing the work of government.
Yeah, although you'd say, oh, sorry, there's a question, was there?
Over there.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to finish, Andrew?
No. Yours going to be better. Go for it.
I'm Zoe. I'm a 2019 John Monash Scholar. I currently work at the Environmental Defenders Office, and we're a charity that's been on a real journey with philanthropy. You know, originally almost 100% of our funding was government, and now 80% of our funding is private philanthropy, and it's only 20% government. And that shift towards philanthropy has really allowed us to be much bolder while simultaneously being apolitical, because, you know, we found that as soon as the government today changed and what we were doing wasn't in their favour, you know, our communities and clients that we represented would be gutted of representation. So it's really allowed us to be bolder while also being more apolitical. But the challenge that we face now that we've shifted more towards that philanthropy model is the disconnect we sometimes find between the agenda of, you know, the sort of motives and goals of donors to the motives of the communities we represent and the clients we represent. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts around how those two can better be in conversation with each other and philanthropy can remain responsive to communities' needs.
You go first.
Such a great point. Thanks, Zoe. I think it's kind of an inherent challenge with the philanthropic sector, say compared to the private sector, is that the beneficiary is not the same as the person funding. And so you kind of have to solve for both things in your way of operating to get a really good and workable model, rather than a kind of user pays model. At the same time, it's really exciting and creates a lot of opportunities if you get it right. I think, like, sometimes in my own experience, you can feel like you have to, like, package up the stories and present them in a certain way in order to try and basically get people to donate money to support the work that you're doing. But I think I really admire leaders in the non-profit sector who really take a lead in thinking, no, we really have to create strong connections between our funders and our beneficiaries that are really kind of authentic and genuine, and therefore have the courage to say, you know what, actually, that program we were running last year, it didn't really work out as expected on the ground. And here we can talk to the people who were implementing it and learn from those mistakes or changes and do it better next time around. It requires a real sort of courage and authenticity, I think, to close that loop. And the more that people can do it, the better.
But I mean, I'm really surprised that you would have donors who didn't know, the work that you're doing. I mean, I mean, it goes to the question of what do you, as somebody who has concerns about issues, what are you looking for when you do fund an organisation? And I mean, there's many organisations that I would have supported over the years whose thematic I absolutely support, who may have gone about it differently, and as Ryan says, may have had failures, but that's fine. That's okay. That's no problem, because it's the essence of what it is, of what the work is that they're doing, that appeals to me, that resonates with me, that I think is important. I mean, obviously, if there's a total disconnect in sort of the values of the donor and the organisation, notwithstanding the thematic might be there, then, you know, you might fund it once and then say, no, I don't like the way they go about that business. But I'm surprised that if there would be much of a disconnect.
Yeah, I certainly think obviously we're not really noticing a disconnect with values. There's absolutely an alignment with that. It's mainly around, I think, strategies or priorities. So some philanthropy will come tied with particular outputs that we have to achieve, but the dictates of what's needed in the community or within particular groups might be different from those outputs in any given period of time, and it can sometimes make our work artificially skewed towards meeting the outputs. And so I think the journey we're on at the moment is just trying to make sure that the needs of the clients we're serving and the funders' objectives can be
aligned.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, but I think Ryan is totally correct. I mean, I think that if you're authentic and upfront and say, these are the problems we're solving, this is how we're doing it, you know, are you happy to be our philanthropic partner? Then there's no problem. You won't have those problems of communication. But also it's interesting, Zoe, because I think that experienced philanthropists and PAFs now are asking or are much more realistic about what it is the organisation that they're supporting can deliver. And my observation is, it could just be anecdotal, is that they're not being as stringent and prescriptive as may have happened in the past. You're not finding that?
Send those donors our way.
Peter.
My question is about the role of corporate philanthropy. So perhaps the question for both Andrew and Carol as well, because personal philanthropy is all about giving your own money away. Corporate philanthropy, there's a segment out there that argues quite stridently that corporates shouldn't engage in social or progressive causes. It's not their money to give away, it's the shareholders. Now, I happen to personally disagree with that. I'd be interested to know how CBA thinks about that balance, and Carol, through your corporate background, how you think about that balance as well.
I'm also interested in the CBA.
I mean, it is a very good question. And Peter, when you talk about sort of shareholder value, it also depends on the time horizon by which you're talking about it. And, you know, I think if you're talking about long-term returns for a corporate entity, it's really important you keep all stakeholders in balance. You know, and all stakeholders, your regulators, your shareholders, your customers, your people, and everything that you know well. You know, and a key part of that is community and society as well. And certainly within the Commonwealth Bank, we think we've got a critical role to play in community. And therefore, and this is where I believe in, you know, I think I use Mark Carney's words, you know, quite a bit, where value equals values, you know, more often than not these days. And I think if you invest in the values of the community, that's ultimately going to generate value for the organisation in the long term. So that's the way we try to think about it. But then naturally, there's many areas that you could go to in terms of giving sort of time and money. And I think you've got to be very careful in your shot selection around some of that as well, because, you know, and certainly Commonwealth Bank, banks all parts of society, the entire economy, of which there can be quite divergent views on certain topics as well. So it's a balancing act. How's that go?
Not bad. I think that, years ago, probably 20, 25, 30 years ago, corporate philanthropy was seen as being, what does the chairman and or his or her partner want to support, which is their favourite charities. I think we've actually come a long way since then, and I think, Peter, the debate has been had around corporates being part of a greater society and supporting the health and nurturing of that society. And I don't think that there's any question anymore about corporates playing a role in supporting Australia as a nation, and when there are needs that need fulfilling, that they play their part. As to their involvement in progressive issues, I mean, I think we all would have been aware of the conversation that was happening through the marriage equality debate. And I think that corporates have every right to voice an opinion, as their shareholders have every right to sell their shares and say, I don't agree with the representation that this corporate, is having in the society, so I don't want to be a shareholder anymore. So I think that business corporates are an integral part of our society and the way it functions, and absolutely should have a voice in those matters.
Well said. I'm just conscious if there's
Is my dessert on the table?
it is, but you got another question to get through before you get there.
I don't want to stand between our lovely speakers and dessert, so I'll keep it brief. In the context of accountability, Silverstar 2017 John Monash Scholar. In the context of accountability and the debacle that happened between Netball Australia and Hancock Prospecting, what are your individual approaches to accountability, not only to the organisations that you're supporting, but also to the broader society as we talk about progressive issues? And Ryan, as the sportsman in the room, I heard a quote recently at a conference about mega sporting events and human rights. The quote was that one person's philanthropy is another person's sports washing. So the role of sports is essentially covering up problematic practices, and we've also seen it in climate change where greenwashing and actually taking away from real action. So just a light question to end.
Dessert feels a fair way off, doesn't it, at this point?
It does. Thank you, Zolfa. So I'll start with the netball and then move on to the sports washing. No, I think that the Hancock and Netball Australia issue was an example of how we have changed. Echoing Carol's point about society's moved on. I mean, maybe that debate is still being had live with issues like this, but I think, it's moved probably from where it was 10 years ago. And I think athletes are recognising that they have an opportunity to stand up for their values, and they're supporting each other to do so. And I think the more enlightened organisations will also support the athletes to do that, along the lines of the discussion that you two were just having about, how an organisation ultimately represents the values of society if it's doing a good job.
Can I interrupt 1 second there, though? Because isn't it interesting, the debate they've been having in Qatar, when the footballers wanted to wear the rainbow armbands and they were told that they would be, I don't know, in some way disadvantaged, or because of the armbands. Well, what do you think about that?
I think I read a brief article about this, so I may not have the full details, but I'm familiar with the issue. I don't know, I think it's a really tricky one. I can understand if you're FIFA or if you're the IOC, you probably don't want your big sporting event, which you plan for 4 years, to just become an opportunity for every political cause to have their moment of protest, because if that happens ad infinitum, then it's probably taking away from the kind of substance of the event itself. But on the other hand, it's really important that those events are used as an opportunity to speak up for causes. You know, like the Iranian soccer team were incredibly brave in the protest that they made. And I think we've seen, you know, going back, there were eras where sports people would protest against apartheid in South Africa, for example. So sport can be a part of social change for good, and just needs to be the right balance where the organisation finds the right avenue for athletes to express those views and express them in the right way.
Fascinating.
Did you want to add any final comments on?
No, he's the expert on
No, it's very well answered. I think, well, please join me firstly in thanking Carol and Ryan, our two exceptional guests. And I'd also like to thank Anne-Marie, the John Monash Foundation, Gillian, the board, and all the work you do for this exceptional talent that we've got in Australia and promoting it. So we're honoured to be a part of it, and enjoy the dessert, and look forward to seeing you through the course of the next year as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.